Hi, my name is Saskia Eddy and I'm a PhD student based at Queen Mary University of London. And welcome to our webinar series. My colleague, Professor Sally Hopewell, based at the University of Oxford, will be explaining what is the best way to report pilot and feasibility study research, focusing on abstracts and flowcharts. So, Sally, what is the consort for abstracts? And why is the consort for abstracts extension for pilot and feasibility studies important?
Thanks, Saskia. That's a really good question. So I'm going to start by just explaining why I think abstracts are really important and potentially the most important part of an article. So in well-written abstracts of randomized trials are really important, and that's because readers will base their initial assessment of a trial based on that information reported in the abstract. And we know that people then use this information to decide whether or not they want to seek more information about the trial. So in some parts of the world, we need to be aware that health practitioners often only have access to the abstracts, because the full articles are often behind paywalls. And so sometimes healthcare decisions may be made purely on the basis of that abstract. And so in 2008, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors said that all clinical trials should contain an abstract that include items that the consort group has deemed essential. And so consort had created a checklist of items that people should report in their abstract, including the trial design, the methods, the results, and the conclusions. And so what the pilot and feasibility study group has done is create an extension for abstracts, specifically for reporting of pilot and feasibility trials, and providing some specific guidance in the form of an extension.
Okay, brilliant. And so what are the main differences between the consort for abstracts and the extension for pilot and feasibility studies?
Yeah, so I've put this slide up here, which on the left-hand side shows you the standard items for the consort for abstracts extension. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the extension for pilot and feasibility studies. So people can have a look at that in more detail, but just some of the key differences, obviously telling the reader in the title and the abstract that it is actually a pilot study. And whereas in the main, for a main trial, we're talking about primary outcomes for a trial, what we're really talking about here in terms of a pilot and feasibility study is about the pre-specified assessments and measurements to address those objectives. And then as we go further down, if we look at the results in the for a main trial, we're looking at the number of participants randomized, whereas in an extension for an abstract for a pilot study, we're looking at the number of participants screened and randomized for each of the pilot study objectives. And that then relates again to the numbers analysed, relates to the pilot and feasibility study objectives. So that's the real difference that we're looking at in terms of the differences between the main trial and the pilot extension.
Okay. And now we've covered abstracts, what about flow diagrams? So why are they important?
Yeah, so another slide for you. So flow diagrams are a really important element of any trial, and they're widely adopted for main trials. And if I just summarize briefly what a standard consort flow diagram would include, it would look at the numbers of patients who are assessed for eligibility, the numbers randomly assigned to each group, the numbers that received the treatment as allocated, and the number that completed treatment as allocated. And in the main consort, as I say, we're looking at the primary outcome with the numbers randomized and reasons for exclusion.
Okay. And now that you've mentioned the main consort, so what's the difference between the main consort flow diagram and the extension for pilot and feasibility studies?
Sure, and I've got another diagram here for you, and I've tried in red to highlight what the key differences is. And I think a key difference with a pilot study is collecting data around the numbers of patients that were actually screened prior to eligibility assessment, and that's really important. Other items, as you can see, pretty much remain the same. We still want a number assessed for eligibility. Really important that we collect information on those patients that might be excluded, either because they don't meet the inclusion criteria or because they declined to participate. I think that's really important that we capture that in a pilot study. Numbers randomized, numbers allocated to the intervention and loss to follow-up will be the same as per a main trial. But really the key difference here is at the bottom, where we're looking at the numbers assessed for each of the objectives as opposed to the main primary outcome. And then, as I say, this is how this is an example of a main trial. Sorry, not a main trial, but an example of a flow diagram for a pilot and feasibility study. And if you look at the bottom here, in terms of the objectives, they were looking at things around the numbers of questionnaires sent, the number of questionnaires received.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for explaining that, Sally. And thank you to everybody for watching this webinar. So please do see our website for more resources. Thank you.